Hey guys, welcome to Kelton's Corner. We are going to be having a channel here with projects, for everything from at-home gunsmithing, stock refinishing, leatherwork, projects around the house. Just kind of a handyman's do-it-yourself channel mixed with some history. So I'm going to be showing you guys some history from time to time, history of firearms, history of some of the tools that we'll use, and I'm glad to have you guys along for the ride. This is our first episode. My film quality is not going to be the greatest. I'm using my cell phone this time. I don't have my tripod or anything yet, but I have a project that came into my hands that I thought you guys might like to see. And even though I'm not quite ready for the filming aspect of this channel, I can't pass this up. So I got to take some pictures and some film and show you guys what we're doing. The project we're working on is this rifle here. It's a Weatherby Vanguard, and as you guys might see here, let me turn on some light. Our stock has seen better days. This is a polyurethane finish on this stock that has cracked and worn, and pieces of it are coming off. This gun actually belongs to a friend of mine, and he asked if I would give it a shot at refinishing this. Now, the other side's really not any better. Matter of fact, in some places I'd say it's worse. You can see here it's completely worn off the ridge here. The checkering is pretty worn, and then all along this side, let me try and get you an angle there. You can see where that finish has just completely worn off the stock. So now the problem is with that, not only does it look bad, but the wood of your stock's actually very vulnerable to moisture, hand oil, gun oil, and all of that, which can degrade the quality of the stock and degrade the life of this rifle. So we're going to do our best to take and fix that, and hopefully afterwards we'll have a pretty good looking rifle. But we're gonna have to start first with some disassembly, and you can see here on the screws on the bottom edge here, you see that kind of that rolled lip on the screw head. Okay, so that is the mark of some previous disassembly, which was done improperly, and I'm going to tell you why that is here. So screwdrivers are your gunsmithing best friend, and but you got to have the right screwdriver. So when you're looking at the head of your screw, comes in, you know, kind of like this, and most screwdrivers are tapered, and so you're getting bite right here and here on your screw head, and that's what causes that roll on the screw. And so I'll show you guys that one more time here. See that roll, you can see it real prominently on that. The other thing that causes it, and you can see in particular on this screw, how here you've got more rollout, and over here you've got more rollout. Now that's also because of not using the proper width flathead screwdriver. So you want to try and match your screwdriver as close as possible to your screw size. So I actually have here, I've put together a set of flathead screwdrivers, and I've modified them a little bit so that they're more, try and get it to focus there, more parallel with each other, so you get more bite in the screw head. Maybe you can see it a little better with this here. See how they're a little more parallel. And I have a variety of sizes, a variety of widths. Now you can go out and buy screwdrivers that fit the proper size, or some screwdrivers have the proper style heads. You can see it really well on here, how down towards the end the sides are parallel with each other instead of a flat taper. And that's what you want. You want those two sides to be parallel to each other. to provide any of that rollout on the screw head. So back to my illustration here, what you're going for on the screwdriver you're using is you want it to kind of come in more like this, so that you're getting bite throughout the screw. And then when you're looking down and you have your slot there, you don't want it too small and you don't want it too big, because if it sticks out there, you're gonna get tear out on your edges when you turn that screwdriver. So you can kind of see that there. You don't want it too small and you don't want it too big. You want it to be as close to the edge of that screwdriver, or to that screw head, as possible. Okay, so let's get to some disassembly here. Okay, so we're gonna start by getting this sling off of here. So pretty standard sling removal, of course. But we got to get everything off of this stock, and then we got to get the stock off of the rifle as well, since we're going to be completely refinishing this stock. Now this stock's on a Weatherby Vanguard, like I've said a couple of times. This one happens to be in 7mm mag, and this is one of the Weatherby Vanguards made in Japan, and great hunting rifle. It's obviously been my buddy's hunting companion for many years, but it's in need of a little love to give it many more years to come. So we're going to start by getting that sling out of the way, and then we're going to try and match up our screw head to a screwdriver that's going to fit it the best possible out of what we've got. Okay, so we've got a couple of screwdrivers here that we're going to be using. Of course, you know, safety. I'll apologize, guys. I'll be getting that tripod soon. But we always want to make sure that our rifle is completely unloaded. And we can see there, nothing in the rifle. Nothing in the chamber. Nothing in the magazine. And we'll get this rifle cleaned as well. You can see some dirt building up in those tight places there. We'll try and get this thing cleaned up pretty well without actually unmounting the scope that is on here. We already have to remove the rifle from its stock, and I want to prevent taking any more of that off than I need to at this point. Now, of course, if I was doing a full deep clean, or if we needed to get down in here and do some metal work or anything like that, we would have to take the whole thing apart. But for just refinishing this stock, we don't need to go that far. Okay, so we've got that sling off of there, and we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna take the bolt off. And I apologize, some of this is rough camera work, and trying to do this one-handed. So we've got our bolt release right here on the left-hand side of the stock. You go ahead and push that in. The bolt will slide right out. We'll just set that off to the side, and we'll clean and oil that before we reassemble when we're all done with this stock as well. So you can see here, you've got a little bit of that screw poking up through here. That's the screw that's down by the trigger guard there. And we also have a screw in the front of the trigger guard, and we need to get both of those off of there to go ahead and get this stock off. I'm going to go ahead and pull those swivel studs while we're at it too. So once I get those screws out and those swivel studs off, we'll be back. Alright guys, so what we're going to do now, we got these two screws removed, and we put them in our little container here so we don't lose them. If you pop the floor plate on that magazine, it'll take the pressure off before you remove those screws. And then now this should just wiggle right out of there, and it does. That's good. It's good and smooth. And we'll set that off to the side there for some cleanup later as well. Now at this point, the stock will come free of the action, and the barrel here, we can just kind of slide that out like that. And it's always really a good idea every once in a while to take your stock off, take a look and inspect your barrel real close. You want to make sure that you're not getting any rust up underneath this barrel that'll eventually cause pitting and compromise the integrity of the steel. You can see up front here, you can see where there has been a rust spot at some point that removes some of that bluing. That's a really common spot on Remington 700s, Weatherby Vanguards. It just happens to be a spot that traps moisture really well. I'm not seeing a whole lot going on here. Seems to be very little to no rust on this barrel. Maybe a touch here and there right along the stock line. But we'll make sure to get that cleaned and oiled before we put this back together. Now we do have some rust here where this beds up in the stock, and we'll get that, and we'll clean up the trigger assembly a little bit. We'll take some Q-tips to it and get some of that cleaned up there a little bit. And I also like to use pipe cleaners, like old tobacco pipe cleaners, to get into some of those tight spots when I'm not doing a full disassembly. Just to clean up in as many areas as I can, nooks and crannies. So we've got the stock separated from the barrel and the action now. Something I recommend at this point, usually before you set this up to work on the stock, I reattach the trigger guard assembly and put the bolt back in it for storage, just to make sure they don't get separated or lost while I'm working on them. I am going to remove these two swivel studs, and a little trick that I like to use on them, because sometimes they're a little sticky, and I don't want to mess them up. I don't want to twist them out of shape, so I like to use one of these brass rods here just to get in there to be able to screw and unscrew these things. That brass is softer than the steel, obviously, so it's not going to deform your swivel stud. So I'll go ahead and get those removed, and we'll come back. Some people may say that this is not the way to go, but it is one of the methods that you can use to get a stock prepped for a new finish. Now, the key thing about refinishing a stock is really in the wood prep itself. And I've used a combination of things in the past. I've used scraping, I've used citrus strip, and with this really thick polyurethane finish that was on here, some areas of that were rock hard, and some areas were flaking off. So I kind of flaked off areas that were flaking, and then went to this citrus strip. So we're gonna put on a coat of this citrus strip and let it sit for a while. At least an hour to see how it loosens up this finish. Then we'll come back with a nylon bristle brush or a toothbrush or a pick, like a dental pick, plastic dental pick, and a plastic scraper, and we'll see what comes off of this with that. I might still do a combination of scraping in here as well, and with the checkering here, I'm not going to be recheckering this particular rifle, but if you were to rechecker this, you don't have to worry a whole lot about getting everything out of the checkering and then refinishing it, because you're going to be cutting new checkering patterns anyway. So that'll take care of most of the old finish when you recut, and then you would just finish over the top of that. Now, I personally like a oil finish, a rubbed oil finish with a wax on top for my rifles. But my friend wants me to go back with a polyurethane on this as well. So his choice. It's still a good finish. I just personal preference on the oil. So once we get this all stripped down and prepped, I'm going to take you through that process, prepping the wood, and then we will refinish it. And I know you can see here that I've already applied some of the citrus strip on here to let it sit. I've just got one of these little, 89-cent chip brushes. a little container for the citrus strip, and I was wearing gloves when I put it on. You make sure that you've got some eye protection on, you've got some gloves on, because you really don't want to get this stuff in your eyes, and it can react with your skin, give you a reaction. But I like the citrus strip. It's a little less caustic than the other strippers I have used in the past. Haha. But you just paint it on. It's just a paint-on stripping agent. Okay. Get on a pretty good thick coat, and then you let it sit. If you are going to let this sit for 24 hours, you want to wrap it in plastic to make sure that it doesn't dry out all the way while it's still working. But I don't plan on letting it sit that long. I think I'm going to let it sit for about an hour and see what it does this first go round. So you guys can see here I've got a couple of tools. This isn't everything. You also can use a cabinet scraper, which is also called a card scraper, which I might switch to here after we've given this a try. But I've got a little plastic dental pick, plastic scraper, a little nylon bristle brush for kind of scrubbing out the checkering, and the pick to really get down in the edges of the checkering there. They come in a 3-pack. You can get them in your gun cleaning section. I think this is made by like Hopkins and Allen or something like that. And then obviously this brass bristle brush we won't use on the wood stock, but I do have that as well for cleaning metal parts. I do have a razor blade there for kind of doing some light scraping and some fine scraping with the corner if I need to. But let's see what we got going here. So you can see the darker color back here. This is where the finish was pretty well gone, and that stripping agent has kind of wetted the wood a little bit. But let's see what it does with the rest of that finish. You can see it coming off in gooey chunks there a little bit. We're making some progress. It's loosening up, softening for sure. You can see here how it kind of comes off in big globs, and so keep my paper towels handy, and I'll just give this a little scrape here and see what we come up with. Alright, and I'll get back to you after we've given this a little rub down with the plastic scraper. Okay, so I gave that citrus strip a little bit of a scrape. There's a couple of things you can do with it, and since we're going to be doing a light sanding on the wood and everything, we can get a little bit aggressive with trying to get that off of there, but you don't want to do any actual damage to the wood or anything that's going to be real hard to clean back out of there. It looks like there's a bunch of scratches here. That's still finish. That's still polyurethane there. You can see back here I've gotten down to some of the original wood level, but it's just such a thick finish that we're having to really work down to get it all out of there. The places where it was really thin to begin with, like on the edges of the checkering and some of the spots back here on the buttstock, those places came off pretty well, but the rest of it definitely softened up and loosened and was able to be worked a little bit. Scrubbed at it with my brush here, took a light Brillo pad to it, did a little bit of scraping with the razor blade in some tight areas to see how much of it was coming off. And if you get down here with some of the light at just the right angle, you can see I'm getting through layers of the poly, but we're still having trouble getting down to actual wood in several places. And I haven't even started on the other side yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this citrus strip on again, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap it in this plastic garbage bag here for a few hours or maybe overnight, and see how we look tomorrow. So we'll check back in. Okay, so we've had the gun stock sitting in the citrus strip overnight. and while I was at work today. So let's take a look and see where we are at with this process. Okay. Whew. Stinks. Not as bad as some other stripping agents, though. Alright, that's actually looking pretty good. That looks good. Let's see where we're at with getting this finish off. Oh, yeah. That's coming off way better. Okay. There we go. So with that poly finish that we have on there, you really got to let this stuff soak in. You can let them sit for up to 24 hours, according to the instructions on the citrus strip. I try not to let it sit that long if possible. So we'll go ahead and get this off of here as best we can, see where we're at, clean up some other areas, wipe down the stock, and then we will clean the wood with some mineral spirits. Now, the problem with using a caustic agent like this when you're refinishing a stock is you will have to do more sanding and sealing of the pores in the wood, as opposed to scraping the whole finish off with like a card scraper or cabinet scraper. So we'll have to do a little bit more as far as do a light sanding, wet it, whisker it where the little wood fibers stand up, sand those off, wet it down, whisker it again. We'll have to do a few more steps of that because of using citrus strip instead of carding it. But with as hard as some of this finish was, I don't think we had a whole lot of options, unless we wanted to spend quite a bit of time with the card scraper. Okay, so when you guys see this next, I should have this all scraped off and kind of cleaned up, and we'll see where we're at. Alright, so I've got all of the stripping agent off the stock now. It did a really good job on loosening the finish. There were some really tough places where it didn't come loose, over here by the cheek plate, and up here on this other wood up here. It didn't release from this end cap, this wood end cap, very well. So I got it all scraped off with the plastic scraper. You need to make sure that you're using a plastic scraper when you're doing that, because it's gonna, if you use a metal scraper, I shouldn't have to say this, but if you do, you're gonna gouge the wood. You're gonna leave a lot of marks in it. I also used the hard bristle, nylon bristle brush to really scrub down in the checkering, following kind of the checkering pattern as best I can. And then I like to use this end, the single row of brush bristles, for doing around the edge of the checkering in here. Now, I do use also the little plastic dental pick, but I find that this end is pretty flexible, so I actually cut the other end off to use to get into some of the grooves here, and like in around the back where the tang is, and in where the bolt goes and stuff like that, to really kind of scrape at it. And you'll see that there are a few places where you'll still see some shine in the pores of the wood, and that's okay. That'll kind of buff out as you do your light sand. Now, you don't want to do any really rough sanding on this. You just want to be using some fine grit sandpaper. So I'm going to actually start straight with 220. Sometimes I start with 180. But this is really not in need of anything else. grittier. I will tape off the checkering before I really get to the sanding. Even though the checkering is heavily worn on this rifle, since we're not going to re-checker it, I don't want to make it any worse than it is. And then something else, when you're sanding one of these, you want to leave your butt plate on so that you don't get any roll on the end of the stock. That's a really prominent sign of a poor refinish job on a stock, to see that roll. Now on this one, there's actually a little bit of a lip between the buttstock and the stock, and that's just from the factory. It wasn't perfectly fit to begin with, but by the time we're done, that'll kind of fade away a little bit because we'll be sanding right up over the edge of that. And then when we refinish it, I'm going to tape off the white, but I will leave this little black ring untaped so that it is part of the poly coat when I coat this. The other thing that you want to be careful of, this insert here that's inletted into the pistol grip, the bottom of the pistol grip here, this one is plastic, and so the citrus strip, if you leave it sit on this particular part for too long, it will start to soften that plastic, and you don't want that. It's faux ivory plastic. I did not realize that this time, so I actually did start to soften a little bit, but I caught it, cleaned it up, and then when I polish it back down with the sandpaper, you won't notice. When you are sanding this, you want to try and make sure that you keep flat, sharp edges where they belong. And so to help with that, you really want to use a backer. In this case, I'm just using a busted off piece of a yardstick as a wood backer to give it that little bit of strength. You can use a sanding block. You could use a felt pad, like a really thick felt pad, just so that you're not getting quite that roll and you're not getting that wave in the wood that you get if you sand with just your hands, because you won't get an even sanding if you use just your hands. When you're sanding on something like the ridge of this cheek plate here, cheek pad, you want to sand up to the edge from the top and then lightly come in from underneath. You don't want to roll over that. This edge should just barely be broken by sanding, but not rounded, not truly rounded over. You don't want it to be like a crisp, sharp corner, just slightly broke over. And that goes for several areas, like on the edge of the pistol grip base here. Here you do want a fairly sharp corner, so when you're sanding on this, you're definitely going to want to have a block so that you can come in and sand at a flat piece. And then for in here, in the bolt inlet, what I'll do is I'll take a round file and I'll wrap that round file in sandpaper and just hit it real light to clean it up a little bit. It doesn't need a whole lot. Most of these bolt inlets are kind of rough to begin with, and that's just the nature of the beast because of the funky end grains that are in there because of the inletting process, but we'll get there. And then you can see how I've still got a little bit of buildup in here of some of that finish after it was stripped. So I will, before I refinish this, come in with the pick and we'll clean that out just kind of like that. And then there are a few places where it's got some oil impingement and penetration. So there's a little bit of gun oil in here that you can see seeping into the wood just a touch. And then there's some hand oils that have soaked in where the finish had worn off over here. And so a way to get that to lift up is to use a heat gun or a hair dryer. And you're going to use a heat gun on a low setting. You don't want to have it on full setting because you can actually burn the wood, and you don't want to do that. You just want to get the oils to start to lift out of the wood. So if you heat that up a bit, the oils will start to come back to the surface, and then you can blot the oils off with a paper towel. And I've worked on this a little already, so I don't know how much more oil I'll actually get out of it. But if you heat it a little here, you should start to see some of that oil come to the surface, and I'm seeing a few tiny drops coming up still, but not a whole lot. That's okay, it'll blend as we refinish and sand and stuff like that. But you want to try and get as much of that oil that's not supposed to be there out of there as you can. So I've got like 1 or 2 little drops. I don't know if you guys can see them there. Maybe kind of catch that one drop right there poking up. You can see the reflection. So you'll just take that right kind of in there, and you'll start to blot these away. Okay? Alright, so next step, I'm going to tape off the checkering, come back in with the razor, following the edges here, cutting the tape off so that it's just covering the checkering. Then I'll come in and start doing a little bit of light sanding. Again, I'm using 220 grit. You don't want to get aggressive with this, because once you start stripping off wood, you can't add it back on. You want to just do a light sand. And then once you've gotten the whole thing kind of lightly sanded, you'll take and wet a paper towel, you'll wipe it all down, get the dust off, and start working that dust into the wood pores a little bit to fill in the pores. And you're whiskering at the same time. That water will start to lift the end grains of the wood, so it'll feel smooth after you've sanded it, and then it'll feel kind of fuzzy after you wet it down a little bit. And then, so you want to do that 3, 4, 5 times, and then you'll stop feeling that whiskering happening after you've done it a few times, and that's about the time you're ready to actually finish it. And I'll show you some of that process after I've had a chance to tape these off and do some of the sanding. Okay, so we've got our final sand done. I've taken the tape off of that checkering. You know, some of it's okay. It appears to be pressed in checkering, not cut checkering, which would explain part of why it's so worn up here. But you know, every gun has a history and a story, and you know, the fact that the checkering's worn and there's a little bit of staining and a few little nicks and bumps that I didn't take all the way out is just part of this particular gun's story. We will next be moving to actually coating it in its first coat of poly. We're going to go with a non-yellowing clear satin poly. I'm using a Minwax one this time around. I will tape off up to the white line here so that I can leave the rubber butt pad on there, butt plate on there, and still hit this little bit of the black ring to seal between that black ring and the stock. I know that that might not be ideal if you were ever going to actually remove the butt plate, but this gun actually lives with a another pad on over the top of this, and I want to make sure that any moisture that gets in there doesn't seep between the two. So I'm going to try and seal between that all the way up to the white strip there. Probably the hardest part on this thing so far is this little bit of inletting here, this faux ivory diamond. Softened up on me because it's plastic, turns out, and I had to let it re-harden, and then I had to polish it down with some 400 grit sandpaper. And once it's coated again, it'll be sealed up. It'll look pretty good. You don't ever want to round into any of the inletting for your trigger guards or anything. Always make sure that you're using a block when you sand across there, because you really do not want to round any of that off. You want a good square tight fit. As far as the checkering goes, I have gone back through. I've scraped the edges with my pick just to get any last bits of gunk out, and then giving it a good scrub down with the nylon brush, just working with the edges and the direction of the checkering. So I think we're pretty much ready for doing some finish. Okay, so we are out here putting on our first couple of coats of the polyurethane, and you can see the grain already starting to kind of pop out a little bit, which is good. We want to get some of that appearance, you know, like the swirls and the wood knots and stuff like that. I think it's coming along pretty well. Some of the, see if I can get some of this highlighted with a little bit of light here. You can see some of that gloss coming back. It's actually making the checkering look quite a bit more pronounced, which is great. It's even looking better up here on the really worn checkering. So I'm just doing multiple very light coats of the poly. It's really easy to get drips and runs in the polyurethane that I'm using, so you gotta go real slow and multiple coats. So you can really see some of that grain distinction coming back that you couldn't really see anymore, which is wonderful. So I've moved the stock inside now, and I've got probably actually done 15 or so very light coats back to back with that poly, and it's really getting about to where I want it. So the next thing I'm gonna, alright guys, so we've gone ahead, we've finished about 20 coats of the polyurethane on this stock now. We're gonna take, I've got my steel wool here. I soaked it in the acetone like I was telling you guys about before, and I'm letting it off gas now. It's still a little moist. I'm gonna let that finish off gassing. But we're gonna take that steel wool, we're gonna do a real light buff on this finish, and then I'm gonna do the last two steps that I like to do on a stock. It might seem weird, you guys might not agree, but you know, this is furniture to a gun, in my opinion. So I use the original beeswax House Beautiful blend, or whatever they call this, furniture polish. And then when I'm done with that, I do seal it even with one more step of wax. And this is the funny part here, but I found it works really well and they're cheap. I just use the wax toilet bowl gasket, dip my finger in it, paste it in, and then just buff it out. And it seems to work awesome. Okay. And take our gloves off there. And I think we're pretty well in business. You guys can see there. Oh, there we go. All right. And start cleaning this gun up. And we'll start getting her back together. Okay, so we are reassembled and clean. You guys can really see the difference in that stock. I just gave it a really good scrub and an oil. I also hit it with the Barricade, the Birchwood Casey Barricade, which is a rust protectant for displacing moisture, and went through the reassembly. Didn't end up doing the cold blue. I mean, it's not, the gun just has some good honest wear. I mean, that's, gives it a little character. It's not my rifle, so I did not go that far. Now, if he changes his mind and or asks me to do it, I certainly will. But here's a good look at that that refinish job we did. Some of the staining wouldn't come out, like I said earlier, but the finish is at least complete and has this nice and sealed. It should protect it for a good long time. So there you go. That's episode 1 in the books. If you guys have suggestions or questions or anything like that, I'm always willing to learn from people that know more than I do. Put it down in the comments, and I'll do my best to respond. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and if you like this, I hope to see you back.